Police officer mocks black elderly woman who was buying diapers in a store. But when he finally discovers the cashier's identity, he is left in shock. What happens when prejudice meets the truth? In a convenience store in Detroit, an apparently simple encounter between an elderly woman and a police officer reveals much more than appearances suggest. Mrs. Evelyn Johnson, at 74 years old, is a woman of strong spirit and admirable resilience. A widow and dedicated grandmother, she faces life's challenges with dignity, especially while caring for her grandson, Michael, who needs adult diapers due to a medical condition. The convenience store, where she goes to buy the necessary items, is an ordinary space but carries the tension of a difficult day. The shelves are crammed, and the cold lighting does not help create a welcoming atmosphere. Evelyn, who lives in a humble neighborhood and is respected by her community, enters the store with a determined look, despite the exhaustion she carries on her shoulders. She feels that her mission is vital not only for Michael, but also for her own dignity. However, the presence of Officer James Miller, 42, turns that moment into something uncomfortable. Worn down by the routine in one of the most violent cities in the United States, he watches Evelyn with disdain. Raised in an environment that fed his distorted views about minorities, James does not hesitate to judge the elderly woman, believing she might be cheating the system. For him, the sight of an elderly woman buying diapers is, at the very least, suspicious. The distrustful look he casts at Evelyn reveals more about his own insecurities and prejudices than about the reality of the situation. Meanwhile, John Matthews, a 26-year-old African-American law student, is at the cash register. He works hard to pay for his studies and is dedicated to social causes in his community. Noticing the tension between the elderly woman and the officer, he knows he needs to intervene. The respect he feels for Evelyn, an emblematic figure of struggle and overcoming, motivates his action. When the elderly woman approaches the register, James cannot contain a rude remark, insinuating that she is wasting public resources. Evelyn's polite but firm response echoes in the store, challenging the office. At that moment, the dynamic changes drastically. James recognizes John and remembers a previous encounter when he had treated the young man aggressively and unfairly. This recognition creates a fissure in his worldview. John, calm and steady, explains that the diapers are for Evelyn's grandson, revealing the truth behind appearances. The tension in the air is palpable as James begins to perceive the fragility of his own judgments. What James does not see immediately is the transformation taking. He observes Evelyn's strength and John's dignity, and for the first time he questions his beliefs. What seemed to be just a mundane encounter becomes a moment of deep reflection for the officer. He begins to understand that his view of life, fueled by prejudices and stereotypes, may be completely wrong. The emotional impact of the encounter with Evelyn and John forces him to confront his flaws and leads him on an internal journey of reassessment. The scene ends with James leaving the store in silence, shaken by everything he has seen and heard. The complicity between Evelyn and John strengthens, and a subtle smile is exchanged between them, symbolizing resistance and hope in a system that often tries to oppress them. They become not only figures of their community, but also symbols of overcoming and dignity, challenging the simplistic narratives that the world has imposed on them. The atmosphere in the convenience store was heavy. Evelyn, with her shopping cart, felt the tension in the air. Officer James Miller's gaze followed her like a shadow, and she couldn't help but wonder why someone cared so much about her presence. The daily struggle to care for Michael did not allow her any luxuries, and yet here she was facing yet another obstacle. The accumulated fatigue of her 74 years became a heavier burden every day, and the last thing she wanted was an unnecessary confrontation. As James watched, he did not know that the elderly woman in front of him was a woman who had faced challenges much greater than he could imagine. The loss of her husband, the struggle to keep the house, and now the responsibility of caring for a special grandson. Every diaper she bought was not just a necessity, it was a symbol of love and duty. But for James, these nuances did not exist. He saw only what he wanted to see, feeding his own insecurities and prejudices. The register was busy, and John Matthews, the young man working there, noticed the growing tension. He knew that Evelyn was a respected woman in her community, and seeing an officer treating her with hostility deeply disturbed him. John had grown up in an environment where injustices were visible, and the experiences that he and his family faced shaped his worldview. He remembered moments when he felt powerless, when prejudice hit him hard, and he was not willing to remain silent now. When James made his rude comment about public resources, John did not hesitate. He approached, his voice firm and clear. "With all due respect, sir, she is here buying diapers for her grandson. It is none of your business how she uses what is hers." John's words echoed through the store, and an uncomfortable silence settled in. Evelyn felt a wave of gratitude for that young man who dared to defend her, but also a fear of what might happen next. James, on the other hand, was in an emotional whirlwind. John's reaction made him question his own stance. He remembered a conversation he had with his father, a man who had always told him he needed to maintain order in a chaotic world. But that order was increasingly revealing itself as a mask for prejudice. The truth unfolding before his eyes challenged him to deconstruct everything he believed. He felt his own vulnerability, a strange sensation he didn't know how to handle. The tension escalated when Evelyn, in a low voice, said to James, "I am a grandmother, not a criminal. I am doing the best I can for my grandson." The weight of her words hit James like a punch to the stomach. He looked into Evelyn's eyes and saw not just an elderly woman, but a woman who carried the weight of generations. The prejudice he had nurtured seemed so small and petty in the face of her strength. But the situation couldn't be resolved with just a dialogue. Evelyn's life was filled with challenges. After her husband's death, she had to learn to deal with bills, expenses, and bureaucracy that never seemed to end. Each month, the struggle to provide what Michael needed grew more intense. She had to attend social services, face judgmental looks, and often deal with the disdain of people like James. With each new day, the strength she thought she had became a constant battle. Meanwhile, James was battling his own demons. He knew that the prejudices he carried were harmful, but how could he free himself from them? He had a job to do, a responsibility to the community, but how could he fulfill that if his perception of the world was being shaken? The encounter with Evelyn and John was becoming a turning point in his life, a call to action to confront his beliefs. However, the battle was far from simple. John, noticing the subtle change in James's attitude, wondered if perhaps there was a chance for change. He knew that people could transform, but the path was winding. He was also facing his own challenges. The stress of college, his family's expectations, and the pressure to be an advocate in a society that often turned a blind eye to problems left him exhausted. He wanted to make a difference, but the struggle felt endless. Meanwhile, Evelyn felt torn, grateful for John, but still uncertain about what might happen next. The fear of retaliation from James hung in the air. What was unfolding in the convenience store was more than just a simple encounter. It was a clash of opposing forces, where prejudices and truths collided. The hope for a fresh start mixed with uncertainties about the future, and everyone there knew that transformation would require more than words. Real change would require courage, not just from Evelyn and John, but also from James, who now found himself in front of a mirror reflecting his own flaws. The atmosphere in the convenience store remained tense, and the interaction among James, Evelyn, and John was not just a clash of words, it was a confrontation of worlds. Evelyn felt her heart racing, not only because of her concern about what James might do next, but because of the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable. The daily struggle she faced to care for Michael seemed amplified in that moment, where her dignity was at stake. James, for his part, felt a mix of anger and confusion. He hadn't expected the situation to take that turn. The young man working the register seemed to possess a courage he himself lacked. John's words echoed in his mind, and the image of the elderly woman before him began to transform. She was not just a grandmother. She was a fighter who, despite life's challenges, stood firm out of love for her grandson. But what did that mean for him? What did he really know about sacrifice? The tension heightened when James, unable to control his emotions, stepped forward. "You know nothing about my life," he exclaimed, addressing John, who did not back down. The young man, with his head held high, replied, "And you know nothing about hers." The verbal dispute felt like a dangerous game, and Evelyn wished it would all end. James's gaze, which had once been filled with judgment, was now filled with uncertainty. He wondered if he had the right to treat Evelyn that way. It was an internal battle consuming him. Meanwhile, Evelyn's life outside that store did not stop. Upon returning home, she faced the reality of a grueling day-to-day existence. The small apartment was cluttered with scattered toys and the constant reminder of Michael, who depended on her for everything. Each diaper purchased represented not only a necessity, but also the struggle against loneliness and the fear of failing. The lack of emotional support made her feel isolated. She often found herself thinking about the life she could have had if circumstances were different. The relationship between James and John also became more complex. The young man did not understand why the officer seemed so closed off in his beliefs. He wanted to help, but felt that his words were not enough to break down the barrier that James had built over the years. Each interaction felt like a misstep, and John's frustration grew. He remembered his own family, the struggles they faced, and how supportive voices were essential to overcoming obstacles. He wanted James to see that change was possible, but how could he do that if the officer was so trapped in his own prejudices? Night was approaching, and the store began to empty. The few remaining customers watched the scene in silence, as if witnessing a drama that touched them in some way. Evelyn, feeling the pressure, decided she had to speak again. With a trembling but firm voice, she said, "I am not a criminal. I am a grandmother fighting to give my grandson a dignified life." Her words floated in the air, heavy and laden with emotion. What should have been a simple shopping moment turned into a life lesson. Before we continue with this emotional story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching this video from. James, upon hearing Evelyn's declaration, felt exposed. He didn't have a ready response. What she said echoed in his mind, and he began to realize that there was more at stake than just a critical glance. Her life was a struggle, and he had unknowingly become an obstacle. The idea that he could be part of the problem, that his presence could be a source of pain for someone, left him distressed. John, observing James's reaction, sensed that there might be a change happening. The officer seemed more human, more real, but there was still a long way to go. The tension in the air was palpable, and what could have been a simple misunderstanding was transforming into a crucial moment of reflection for everyone involved. Each of them was facing their own battles, and the truths exposed in that store could lead to a new understanding. Evelyn, tired but determined, knew she had to fight not just for Michael, but for herself as well. Life had been hard, and she couldn't allow prejudice to bring her down. It was a moment to reaffirm herself, to show that she still had strength. And so, amidst the uncertainty and tension, a new hope began to emerge. A hope that perhaps everyone there could learn something valuable, that a grandmother's fight for her grandson could inspire changes, not only in her life, but also in the lives of James and John. The tension in the convenience store persisted, like a taut rope about to snap. After her declaration, Evelyn felt the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. James's gaze, once filled with contempt, was now confused, almost vulnerable. She had always known that the fight for dignity was a lonely battle, but in that moment, a new kind of hope began to sprout within her. Meanwhile, James was struggling against an internal storm. Evelyn's words reverberated in his mind, challenging his beliefs. He remembered his training, how he had always been taught to see the world in black and white. However, the reality before him was much more complex. The image of Evelyn, a fighting grandmother, began to wear down the armor he had always worn. What did he know about sacrifice and struggle? His experiences seemed so distant from her life. He wondered if his prejudices were simply a way to protect himself from the pain he didn't want to face. Just then, a loud noise interrupted their thoughts. The store door swung open forcefully, and a group of young people entered, laughing and talking loudly. Their energy was palpable, but there was something about the way they behaved that sent a chill down James's spine. He noticed that one of the young men was clearly drunk, swaying and making a ruckus. John, sensing the situation, went on alert. He knew that any wrong move could turn the tension into something dangerous. The group approached the counter, and their cheerful demeanor quickly turned into provocation. One of the young men, a scruffy-haired kid, looked at James and shouted, "Look, the cop, what are you doing here? Protecting the old lady and her grandson?" Laughter echoed in the store, and Evelyn felt her heart race again, not only from the tension with James, but also from the threat those young men represented. James, in an impulse to protect Evelyn and John, stepped forward. He knew he needed to act before the situation worsened. "Get out of here! You have no business here!" His voice, usually firm, trembled slightly. The group, however, did not seem intimidated. The drunken young man laughed, and in a sudden movement, shoved the counter, causing some products to fall to the ground. Evelyn, seeing the chaos unfold, felt paralyzed. She wanted to scream, wanted it all to stop, but instead, something inside her ignited. The fight she had always waged for Michael now extended to herself. "Stop!" her voice echoed, surprising everyone. The group stared at her, stunned. "You have no right to disrespect anyone here. This store is a space for everyone." Evelyn's words, filled with emotion and determination, seemed to make an impact. Silence fell for a moment as everyone pondered what they were hearing. The drunken young man stopped, and his eyes, once full of contempt, now reflected confusion. James, standing beside Evelyn, felt his own courage rising again. He was no longer just defending a stranger. He was defending a woman who, like him, was fighting for dignity. But then the group regrouped. The same young man who had spoken earlier shot a challenging look. "And you think you can stop us? Just look at you." The provocation was clear, and Evelyn realized that the situation could easily spiral out of control. She felt the weight of responsibility, not just for herself but also for Michael. What would happen if James couldn't control the situation? James, sensing the growing tension, felt a wave of determination. He turned to the young men, his voice now firmer. "If you don't leave now, I'll call for backup." The expression on the group's faces changed. James's bravery and Evelyn's strength in her words were creating an effect. The drunken young man hesitated, and in a gesture no one expected began to back away. His friends followed suit, and within minutes the group moved away, murmuring in protest. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Evelyn felt tears in her eyes, not from fear but from relief. She turned to James, who looked as surprised as she felt. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. But at the same time, a new concern settled in her mind. This would not be the last time they faced situations like this. The fight for dignity and safety was still far from over. James, for his part, began to reflect on his choices. The confrontation with the youths and the defense of Evelyn opened his eyes to a new reality. He realized that behind his uniform there was a greater responsibility to protect and serve everyone, not just those who fit into his preconceived ideas. The failures of the past began to become a drive for a different future. The emotional impact of that night was profound. The lives of Evelyn and James were intertwined in ways neither of them could have imagined. What had started as a conflict had transformed into a crucial lesson. True strength was not just in self-defense, but in unity in the face of adversity. And above all, a grandmother's fight for her grandson could perhaps inspire a police officer to reconsider his own beliefs. Each of their journeys was just beginning, and the transformation unfolding in their lives promised even greater challenges ahead. Evelyn sat on one of the store's benches, feeling the weight of adrenaline slowly dissipate. The relief of having driven away the youths, along with the unexpected protection from James, brought a sense of renewed strength. However, this relief quickly mixed with a new concern. She looked at John, who was standing behind the counter, his eyes wide. That encounter had impacted her, but the sight of her grandson made her realize the fight was not over. The world outside was still unpredictable, and she needed to be an example of courage for him. "It's okay, dear," she said, trying to put a smile on her face, even if it was shaky. But John sensed the tension in her voice. He stepped closer and held her hand, seeking comfort. Evelyn felt her heart tighten. What could she do to protect him? The reality that he could also be a target of hostility haunted her. She decided she needed to be more than a grandmother. She needed to be a warrior, not just for him, but for everyone who felt threatened. Meanwhile, James stepped back a little, observing the scene. The confrontation had opened a new door in his mind. He questioned his previous stance about how he had faced life. The bravery he felt in helping Evelyn made him reflect on the true meaning of his work as a police officer. He didn't want to be just someone who enforced the law. He wanted to be someone who promoted safety and dignity. The memory of Evelyn's vulnerable gaze stayed with him, reminding him that every person has a story, a struggle. James decided he needed to better understand the lives of the people he was there to protect. He could no longer allow himself to see the world in black and white. What was happening in the minds of those youths? What were the stories that led them to act that way? He wanted to know. So he began to approach the community residents, talking to them, listening to their stories. With each conversation, James felt he was freeing himself from the shackles of his prejudices. He was becoming more human, more empathetic. That same night, Evelyn arrived home and sat at the kitchen table. The soft light from the lamp illuminated the space, but the shadow of tension still hung in the air. She picked up a pen and a notebook, determined to write about her experiences. As she put the words on paper, she felt she was transforming pain and struggle into something productive. Writing about her battles and hopes helped her organize her thoughts and emotions. "Dear God," she began, "today I felt stronger than ever, but I also realized how difficult life can be. I want to be a beacon of hope for my grandson, but I don't know how." The words flowed, and with each sentence, Evelyn felt her determination grow. The act of writing helped her cope with feelings of fear and insecurity. She knew that the struggle was not limited to protecting what she had, but also to building a future where John could live in peace. In the days that followed, the convenience store became a meeting point for the community. Evelyn began to organize small gatherings where people could share their stories and experiences. What started as a convenience space transformed into a place of support. And James, realizing this, decided to join her. He was eager to better understand the community and help create a safer environment. The meetings brought new issues to light. Insecurity, lack of opportunities, and fear were recurring themes. However, the unity of the people began to generate renewed power. Evelyn saw that she was making a difference, even if on a small scale. The stories of struggle shared among the participants strengthened the connection between them. The conversations became a safe space to discuss not only challenges, but also victories, however small they might be. On the other hand, James faced resistance from some of his colleagues. They didn't understand why he was getting more involved with the community. "You're not there to make friends, James. You're a police officer," one of them said once. But those words did not shake him. He had found a new purpose. He wanted to be the change he wished to see, both for his life and for the lives of others. Evelyn and James, each in their own way, were transforming. The turning point they had experienced together had not only changed how they viewed the world, but also awakened a desire to fight for a better future. The new obstacles that arose were challenging, but the strength they found in each other gave them the courage to continue. The path ahead was still filled with uncertainties, but now they knew they were not alone. The fight for dignity, respect, and safety continued, and they were ready to face it together. Evelyn sat on one of the store's benches, feeling the weight of adrenaline slowly dissipate. The relief of having pushed the young people away, along with the unexpected protection from James, brought a renewed sense of strength. However, this relief quickly mixed with a new concern. She looked at John, who was standing behind the counter, his eyes wide. That encounter had impacted her, but the sight of her grandson made her realize that the fight was not over. The world outside was still unpredictable, and she needed to be an example of courage for him. "It's okay, dear," she said, trying to put a smile on her face, even if it was shaky. But John sensed the tension in her voice. He approached and held her hand, seeking comfort. Evelyn felt her heart tighten. What could she do to protect him? The reality that he could also be a target of hostility tormented her. She decided she needed to be more than a grandmother. She needed to be a warrior, not just for him, but for everyone who felt threatened. Meanwhile, James stepped back a little, observing the scene. The confrontation had opened a new door in his mind. He questioned his previous stance, how he had viewed life. The bravery he felt while helping Evelyn made him reflect on the true meaning of his job as a police officer. He didn't want to be just someone who enforced the law. He wanted to be someone who promoted safety and dignity. The memory of Evelyn's vulnerable gaze stayed with him, reminding him that every person has a story, a struggle. James decided he needed to better understand the lives of the people he was there to protect. He could no longer allow himself to see the world in black and white. What was happening in the minds of those young people? What stories had led them to act that way? He wanted to know. Thus he began to approach the community residents, talking to them, listening to their stories. With each conversation, James felt he was freeing himself from the shackles of his prejudices. He was becoming more human, more empathetic. That same night, Evelyn arrived home and sat at the kitchen table. The soft light from the lamp illuminated the space, but the shadow of tension still lingered in the air. She picked up a pen and a notebook, determined to write about her experiences. As she put the words on paper, she felt she was transforming pain and struggle into something productive. Writing about her battles and hopes helped her organize her thoughts and emotions. "Dear God," she began, "today I felt stronger than ever, but I also realized how hard life can be. I want to be a beacon of hope for my grandson, but I don't know how." The words flowed, and with each sentence, Evelyn felt her determination grow. The act of writing helped her deal with feelings of fear and insecurity. She knew the fight was not just about protecting what she had, but also about building a future where John could live in peace. In the days that followed, the convenience store became a gathering place for the community. Evelyn began to organize small meetings where people could share their stories and experiences. What started as a convenience space transformed into a place of support. And James, realizing this, decided to join her. He was eager to better understand the community and help build a safer environment. The meetings brought new issues to the forefront. Insecurity, lack of opportunities, and fear were recurring themes. However, the unity of the people began to generate renewed power. Evelyn saw that she was making a difference, even if on a small scale. The shared stories of struggle among the participants strengthened their connection. The conversations became a safe space to discuss not only the challenges, but also the victories, no matter how small. On the other hand, James faced resistance from some of his colleagues. They didn't understand why he was getting more involved with the community. "You're not there to make friends, James, you're a cop," one of them said once. But those words did not shake him. He had found a new purpose. He wanted to be the change he wished to see, both for his life and for the lives of others. Evelyn and James, each in their own way, were transforming. The turning point they had experienced together had not only changed how they viewed the world, but also awakened a desire to fight for a better future. The new obstacles that arose were challenging, but the strength they found in each other gave them the courage to continue. The path ahead was still filled with uncertainties, but now they knew they were not alone. The fight for dignity, respect, and safety continued, and they were ready to face it together. Evelyn realized that by opening up to the community and sharing her experiences, she was cultivating a new type of wealth. It wasn't material wealth, but a wealth of connections, understanding, and mutual support. She learned that adversities could be transformed into valuable lessons, and each story shared was a step toward healing and unity. James, in turn, felt increasingly self-assured. He didn't have to be alone in his struggle. He learned to accept help and to offer support. The friendships he developed in the community made him stronger and more aware of the complexities surrounding people's lives. He saw that true strength wasn't just in wearing the uniform, but in being present and listening to those he promised to protect. Together, Evelyn and James became examples of overcoming. They faced their fears, learned from their failures, and found a new purpose. Through their journeys, they discovered that true transformation comes from within, and that every small act of kindness can ignite a flame of hope in a world that often seems dark. They were ready to continue their fight, now more united and determined than ever. The day finally arrived. Evelyn and James had organized a large gathering at the convenience store, an event that promised to unite the community in a moment of reflection and support. The tables were arranged around the space, decorated with simple flowers and posters promoting peace and unity. John, excited, helped prepare everything, while the voices of the neighborhood echoed outside, creating an atmosphere of... However, the tension was palpable. In recent days, rumors had begun to circulate that the young people who had confronted Evelyn and James were gathering again. There was fear that they would cause trouble once more, and concern spread among the participants. But Evelyn was determined not to let fear prevail over hope. She took a deep breath, looking at John and feeling the strength she had within her. It was time to show courage. As the first people began to arrive, Evelyn felt a little more at ease. She recalled her words written in her journal about how unity could create a safe space. James was by her side, talking with the residents, always attentive and open. The connection they had built felt stronger than ever, and it inspired her. But as the meeting began, the door opened abruptly. A group of young people entered, the familiar faces of Evelyn and James. The atmosphere changed instantly. Laughter and conversations faded, and all eyes turned to them. Evelyn felt her heart race. It was the moment she feared, but also what she knew she needed to confront. "Look who's here," one of the young people said with a sarcastic smile. "The old lady and her pet cop?" The group started to laugh, but Evelyn didn't let it shake her. She knew their reaction was a cry of pain, a search for attention. It was time to turn that moment into something positive. With a firm yet gentle voice, Evelyn stood up. "I know you," she said, looking directly at the young people. "You are here because you feel lost. I have felt that way too. But it's possible to find a different path." The silence in the room was profound. James, by her side, sensed the courage radiating from Evelyn. He joined her. "You have the power to change your stories," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "Being here today is a first step. We can help each other." One of the young people, clearly annoyed, crossed his arms. "And what do you know about us? What do you have to offer?" He seemed to want to challenge Evelyn and James's sincerity. Evelyn took a deep breath and remembered everything she had learned. "I know that each of you has a story. And I know that often difficulties can seem insurmountable, but I also know that change starts with small steps. Let's talk. Let's listen to each other. We don't have to be enemies. Evelyn's words began to resonate in the room. She saw some young people soften their expressions, their resistance melting away. James, noticing the shift, added, "We can create a space where everyone feels safe. We are not here to judge, but to understand. Let's build together." Evelyn felt that this was a pivotal moment. What could have turned into a confrontation transformed into a dialogue. The young people began to let their guard down and, one by one, started to share their pains and frustrations. Stories of abandonment, loneliness, and lack of opportunities began to flow. Human connection was being created there, in the heart of the store. As the conversation progressed, Evelyn felt her fear dissipating. She realized that true strength was not in avoiding conflicts, but in facing them with empathy and understanding. James, by her side, was visibly moved, witnessing the transformation happening before his eyes. That community was coming together, and the friendship that had developed between him and Evelyn was becoming stronger. The event ended with a sense of renewed hope. The young people, although initially hostile, were now willing to listen and learn. Evelyn and James became symbols of overcoming, showing that change was possible. That gathering was not just a moment of tension, but a milestone of transformation. Looking at John, who was now smiling at the new friendship blossoming, Evelyn felt a wave of happiness. The struggle she had faced had become the foundation of a new beginning. She had discovered that true wealth was not material security, but the connections formed when people came together in search of a common purpose. That night, as she reflected on everything that had happened, Evelyn realized that every step, every failure had led her to that moment. The journey was not just about her, but about everyone around her. Life was full of challenges, but with courage, empathy, and unity, they could overcome any obstacle. Evelyn observed the room as conversations flowed, becoming increasingly animated. The atmosphere of tension that once dominated the space had now transformed into one of warmth and understanding. The laughter and smiles of the young people showed that the barrier between them and the other participants was crumbling. She felt a mix of relief and joy, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. At the end of the gathering, as everyone dispersed, Evelyn felt a hand on her shoulder. It was James. "You were amazing, Evelyn. I knew you had it in you," he said, his gaze full of admiration. She smiled, but she knew that the true merit wasn't hers alone. "We did this together, James. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage," she replied, realizing how he had become a crucial support in her journey. As they helped tidy up the space, John approached. He was radiant, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Evelyn, did you see how they changed? At first, they were so closed off, and now they're open to talking." He could hardly contain his excitement. Evelyn nodded, remembering how those interactions could be a turning point, not just for the youth, but for the entire community. "Yes, John, but this is just the beginning," she said, reflecting on everything that still needed to be done. "We need to keep this dialogue going. The connection can't stop here." John agreed, already considering how they could organize more meetings and activities to keep the communication flowing. That night, as she headed home, Evelyn felt a warmth in her chest. The event had not only brought people closer together, but it had also transformed her own vision of what was possible. She remembered her insecurities, the nights when she wondered if she could make a difference. Now she knew that even amid fear, it was possible to build something beautiful. In the following days, the conversations continued. The young people who had once exhibited hostile behavior began to visit the store, no longer as confrontational, but as participants. One of them, Lucas, approached Evelyn one day. "You know, I didn't expect you to be so nice. I thought you just wanted to push us away," he admitted, looking at the ground. "But now I see that you really care." Evelyn smiled, touched by his sincerity. "We all have our struggles, Lucas. I'm here to listen and help. Together we can find solutions." He nodded, a glimmer of hope beginning to emerge in his eyes. The community, once fragmented, began to unite. The meetings became regular, and the tables that had once been empty were now filled with people of different ages and stories. Evelyn and James organized activities that promoted collaboration and empathy, and each new interaction seemed to further strengthen the bonds among everyone. One day, while walking through the neighborhood, Evelyn had an epiphany. She realized that it wasn't just the convenience store that was transforming, it was the community itself. And more importantly, she was Chai. The experiences had made her stronger, more confident, and above all, more empathetic. "Evelyn," James's voice interrupted her thoughts. He found her in a nearby park, where they were organizing a community event. "Did you see how many people came today? This is just the beginning." He was radiant, and Evelyn felt her heart warm at seeing him so excited. "Yes, James, I feel like we are making a difference. Look at them, all together, talking and laughing. This is what I've always dreamed of," she said, her eyes shining. What had once been a space of conflict now pulsed with life and hope. In that moment, Evelyn realized that her actions had profound consequences. The courage she had cultivated by facing her fears had not only changed her life but also the lives of many others. And as she watched the community come together, she knew that the journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The transformation was happening, and it was all due to the willingness to open her heart and connect. Life was a series of challenges, but with empathy and unity, they could face any obstacle that arose. Evelyn smiled, satisfied, knowing that she had found her place and that together they could build a better future. Evelyn observed the transformation around her. The store, which had once been a cold and uninviting space, now pulsed with life and energy. The young people, who used to keep their distance, exchanged smiles and lively conversations. Each new visitor who entered was like a new piece fitting into a puzzle that had been carefully assembled over the months. Her journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. With each meeting, Evelyn felt stronger and more confident. She had faced her fears and insecurities, and it had shaped her in ways she never imagined. The interactions and friendships she had cultivated were not just an achievement, they were a testament that when one opens their heart, it is possible to transform lives. Through each shared laugh, each story heard, she realized that her role in the community went beyond a simple job. She was a facilitator of connections. One day, while organizing a new activity, Lucas approached her again. "Hey, Evelyn, I wanted to thank you. You changed my life. Before I had no one to talk to, and now I have friends," he said, his tone sincere and vulnerable. She smiled, feeling that those words were a reflection of all the collective effort they had made. "You were part of this too, Lucas. Your courage to open up inspired many," she replied, touched by his gratitude. The meetings became a true space of welcome, where life stories were shared and empathy flourished. What had once been a ground of disputes and distrust was now an example of cooperation and friendship. Evelyn realized that she had found not only a purpose, but a new family within the community. She reflected on how each challenge had taught her to value human relationships, the true wealth of life. However, not everything was perfect. One day, some people who were unhappy with the changes began to disrupt the meetings, seeking to bring back the division that had once existed. But Evelyn, now stronger, did not let herself be shaken. With the help of James and the young people who had gathered around her, she decided that she would not let fear and anger take over that space again. In a special meeting, she stood up and said that they would not allow negativity to defeat them. What they had built together was greater than any attempt to divide them. They would continue to support each other and grow together. Her words resonated in the room, and the strength of the community was manifested in applause and cheers of encouragement. In that moment, Evelyn felt true victory. It was not just about defeating those who opposed them. It was about keeping the light shining in the community, about perpetuating the positive change they had achieved. And so, with each new day, the message of unity and empathy spread, becoming an essential part of the community's identity. Evelyn learned that revenge was not about retaliating, but about continuing to build and love, even in the face of adversity. She had overcome her own barriers, and in doing so, had created a space where everyone could thrive. Looking around, she saw not just friends, but a support network that had chosen to fight for peace and understanding. Evelyn's story is a powerful reminder that each of us has the potential to make a difference. If you have ever faced challenges or felt alone, remember that human connection can bring transformation. Share your experiences and reflections in the comments. Together, let's create a space of support and encouragement, because every interaction counts. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Your voice matters, and together, we can make a difference now.